The air inside the arena felt stale, heavy with the weight of a show that had dragged on too long without a spark. It was late in the broadcast, the time when fatigue usually sets in, but tonight the lethargy felt different, almost suffocating. In the center of the ring stood the current champion, a superstar who had held the gold for over a year, speaking with the confident, rehearsed cadence of someone who had forgotten what it felt like to be threatened. She held the microphone loosely, her voice echoing through the cavernous space, listing off conquered opponents like items on a grocery list. The crowd wasn't booing, nor were they cheering. They were murmuring, a low-frequency hum of indifference that is often more dangerous than hatred. The production team cut 2 shots of fans checking their phones, looking at the exit signs. Completely disengaged from the dominance being paraded in front of them. It was the sound of a division that had been pacified, sanitized, and stripped of genuine danger. Then the atmosphere shifted. It wasn't a sudden blackout or an explosion of pyrotechnics that usually signals a scripted surprise. It was subtle, a disturbance in the rhythm of the night. The champion stopped mid-sentence, looking toward the entrance ramp not with annoyance, but with confusion. The giant LED screens flickered, not into darkness, but into a static grey, washing the colourful arena in a cold, monochromatic light. The hum of the crowd died instantly, replaced by a confused silence that rippled from the floor seats to the nosebleeds. Commentary stopped. There was no manufactured excitement from the announcers, just the sound of papers shuffling and a hot mic catching a genuine, unscripted breath of hesitation. The air pressure in the room seemed to drop, creating that distinct physical sensation one feels before a violent thunderstorm. The camera focused tight on the champion's face, catching the precise moment her arrogance evaporated, replaced by the primal, instinctive realization that she was no longer the predator in the room. This wasn't a show anymore. The script had been burned. The unease was palpable, a collective holding of breath by 20,000 people who suddenly felt like they were witnessing something unauthorized, something that wasn't supposed to happen, and the silence stretched on for an agonizingly long time, turning curiosity into genuine dread. The walking nightmare. The sound that finally broke the silence was not music, at least not in the traditional sense. It was a distorted, industrial screech, a low-end bass thrum that rattled the rib cages of everyone in the front row, followed by a slow, rhythmic stomping that sounded like a march to the gallows. There was no "this is my brutality" scream, no familiar lyrical hook to cue the pop, just the oppressive noise of impending violence. When she stepped through the curtain, the reaction wasn't a cheer. It was a collective gasp, a sharp intake of air that sucked the oxygen out of the arena. It was Rhea Ripley, but not the version the world remembered from 2024 or 2025. Gone was the glitz, the polished superstar aura, and the performative swagger. This Rhea looked leaner, harder, her skin pale against the stark black leather that looked more like tactical armor than wrestling gear. Her hair was longer, unkempt, hanging over eyes that were devoid of the playful malice she used to display. These eyes were dead, focused on the ring with a terrifying intensity. She didn't pose, she didn't acknowledge the crowd. She didn't slap hands with the fans reaching out over the barricade. She simply walked. The pace was slow, predatory, and suffocatingly deliberate. The commentary team, usually quick to shout catchphrases, spoke in hushed, serious tones, struggling to process the visual transformation. They noted the lack of pageantry, the absence of a smile, the way the security guards near the ramp instinctively took a half step back as she passed. This felt like an invasion. The fans in the aisle didn't hold up signs, they lowered them, watching with wide eyes as if a wild animal had just been let loose in a shopping mall. The cameras tracked her boots, hitting the steel steps clang 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 G, step echoing like a judgment. She rolled under the bottom rope, not with the fluidity of an athlete, but with the heaviness of a burden. She stood up, slowly unfolding her frame in the center of the ring, and, for the first time, looked at the champion. The look wasn't a challenge, it was a sentence. The crowd remained in that strange, suspended state of shock, realizing that the fun and games of the last hour were over. The nightmare had returned, but she hadn't come back to entertain. She had come back to haunt. Violence without context. The confrontation that followed was brief, brutal, and entirely devoid of the usual back-and-forth dramatic pacing of professional wrestling. The champion, perhaps out of panic or a desperate need to reassert dominance, threw the first striker forearm that connected solidly with Rhea's jaw. Rhea didn't flinch. She didn't stumble. She simply tilted her head back, absorbing the blow as if it were a minor inconvenience, a fly landing on stone. The champion's eyes widened in legitimate terror, realizing that her best shot hadn't even registered. What happened next was difficult to watch. Rhea moved with a terrifying velocity, closing the distance instantly. It wasn't a wrestling grapple. It was a takedown, raw and ugly. She drove the champion into the mat with a sickening thud, the sound of bodies colliding amplified by the stunned silence of the arena. There were no intricate reversals, no high-flying counters. Just blunt force trauma. Rhea mounted her opponent not for a pin, but to deliver a series of short, controlled strikes that looked uncomfortably real. The referee hesitated, unsure if he should intervene in what looked less like a match and more like an assault. The crowd began to murmur, a low rumble of discomfort. This wasn't the fight forever chant. This was the sound of people wondering if they were witnessing a legitimate incident. Commentary begged for separation, their voices cracking with genuine concern, noting that Rhea wasn't stopping. She pulled the champion up, not by the hair, but by the throat, lifting her effortlessly into the air before slamming her back down with the riptide. But she didn't pin her. She stood over the fallen body, chest heaving, looking down with that same cold, detached expression. She looked at her own hands, then at the devastation she had caused, and then scanned the crowd. There was no celebration in her eyes, no seeking of approval. She looked like a soldier returning to a war she hated but was born to fight. The champion lay motionless, medical staff rushing down the ramp in a panic that felt unscripted, while Rhea simply exited the ring, walking backward up the ramp, never taking her eyes off the carnage. The segment ended not with music, but with the fade-to-black silence of a crime scene. The ripple effect. The broadcast cut immediately to the backstage area, bypassing the usual commercial break, reinforcing the chaotic, unorganized feel of the moment. The camera, shaky and handheld, followed the frantic movement of producers and officials running toward the gorilla position. We saw glimpses of the locker room, usually a place of scripted banter, now filled with wrestlers standing in huddles, watching the monitors with crossed arms and grim expressions. The mood wasn't excitement about a returning star. It was anxiety. The hierarchy had just been shattered. We saw the general manager on a phone, shouting instructions that were unintelligible over the din of confusion. The medical team wheeled a stretcher past the camera, blurring the line between storyline and reality, further unsettling the viewer. The camera finally found Rhea Ripley walking down a concrete hallway, away from the populated areas of the arena. She was alone, no faction surrounded her. No Judgment Day members were there to hi-fi her. She walked past other wrestlers who pressed themselves against the walls to let her pass, avoiding eye contact. The fear was the currency she was trading in now. A brave backstage interviewer attempted to approach her, microphone trembling, asking the standard, "Why are you back?" question. Rhea didn't stop walking. She didn't look at the camera. She simply muttered, "Because you forgot what fear looks like," and kept moving into the shadows of the loading dock. The scene shifted to the parking lot, where paparazzi and fan cam footage showed her leaving immediately, not staying for the rest of the show, not staying to network or talk. She was a ghost who had materialized to deliver a message and then vanished. The social media graphics on the bottom of the screen showed trending topics, not hashtags of excitement, but phrases like, "Is she okay?" and "What just happened?" The narrative had shifted from a sports entertainment return to a developing news story. The locker room, once secure in its pecking order, was now a place of instability. The Queen hadn't returned to reclaim her throne. She had returned to burn the castle down. The cost of the crown. As the show went off the air, the usual copyright graphics appeared over a slow-motion replay of the champion's terrified face, freezing on the moment Rhea walked away. The emotional residue of the return lingered. This wasn't just about a championship belt. The story being told was one of consequence. For years, the fans had clamored for her return, treating her absence like a void that needed filling. But now that she was here, the reality was starker than the fantasy. The script had tricked the audience into wanting a savior, only to give them a destroyer. The lingering question wasn't who will beat her, but rather what has she become? The narrative arc had moved beyond wins and losses into the realm of character study of a woman who had perhaps spent too much time in the darkness to ever truly step back into the light. The final image burned into the viewer's mind was not of a triumph, but of isolation. The return of Rhea Ripley in 2026 wasn't designed to sell t-shirts. It was designed to sell the uncomfortable truth that time changes people, and rarely for the better in this industry. The audience was left with a heavy, sinking feeling, the realization that the mummy they loved was dead, replaced by something far more formidable and far less human. The screen faded to black, leaving the viewers in silence, forcing them to sit with the discomfort. There was no upbeat outro music, no "don't forget to like and subscribe," just the black screen and the echo of that industrial thrum. The video ended, but the story had just begun, and for the first time in years, nobody knew how it was going to end. The shock wasn't that she was back. The shock was that we might wish she hadn't returned at all. This was the new reality of the WWE, a reality where the hero doesn't save the day, but ends it.